So I wore this jersey today because I just want to be ready in case the Browns need me. At quarterback, because we don't have one. So that's my first joke. Shut up, Steelers fans. And then secondly, somebody, here, you'll appreciate this, Steelers fans. Somebody came up to me before first service and they're like, hey, is that jersey a part of your sermon? And we're in a sermon series right now on failure. And I don't even think they knew that. I was just like, it's just like almost prophetic. So, yeah. Half of us in here are praying for one thing, half of us are praying for another, but whatever, it's all right. We all love Jesus. So, before I jump into my sermon, I want to remind you of something. Next week is a weird week. I don't know if you know this is a little-known holiday called Thanksgiving next week. So we won't be having church on Thursday. We're having church on Thursday. We won't have it on Thursday. But on the following Sunday, so a week from today, after this service next week, we're having something called our Mosaic OG meeting. And all that is if you've been going to this church for like longer than 2 years, basically if you remember having church in the Performing Arts Center over at the high school, we're inviting you to a meeting where we're just kind of talk about, we've experienced a lot of growth and a lot of change over the past 2 years here. We just kind of want to anchor the people who've been here the longest to kind of orient everybody to what's going on now. That doesn't say like, hey, if you haven't been going here very long, like, hey, can I come? Of course you can come. We're gonna talk about where we've been and kind of where we're going. But if you have been here for 2 years, man, I really want to encourage you, if you could just stay for a little while after service next week. It'll only be about 45 minutes. Just want to really talk about where we've been and kind of orient us around the growth and change that we've experienced here past couple years. It's been really cool. All right. So we're in a sermon series called Failing Forward. And where I want to start today, have you ever had somebody like do something to you, and maybe they hurt you, maybe it was just something that kind of threw you off, and you kind of feel almost compelled to like ask them why, like why'd they do what they do, and you like want them to explain it. And it's weird, like it almost the question of why did you do that almost kind of comes out of you, like you don't even really want it to sometimes. And then have you noticed that in your life when you have those conversations and they're like explaining why they did what they did, that you're almost never satisfied with the answer, that it's never like, oh, that's why you did it. I'm fine now. Like it's almost never that. It's interesting, right? You want to ask, but the answer is almost never satisfying. Okay, so now flip that around. Have you ever been the one who maybe did something to hurt somebody or let somebody down, and you feel compelled to tell them, like to explain yourself and to maybe tell, hey, this is why this happened, and then you get an opportunity and you're explaining yourself, telling them reasons why you did what you did. And have you ever been watching their face and you just realize that it's not working? Like they don't care what you're saying. Maybe even you're possibly making it worse by trying to explain yourself. Have you ever been in these situations? So both of those situations lead me to a question. This is a really important question. This is the question we got to go after today. What is the difference between a reason and an excuse? What's the difference between a reason and an excuse? This is really important because we like reasons, right? We want to hear reasons. We want to give reasons, but we do not like excuses, right? We don't want to be giving excuses, and we certainly don't like hearing excuses either. So what is the difference? A reason is something legitimate and helpful. An excuse is something illegitimate and a lot of times harmful. What's the difference? I read a guy this is more of an observation than an answer. He said, well, the difference between a reason and excuse depends on which seat you're sitting in. If you're hearing it, it sounds like an excuse. If you're giving it, it sounds like a reason. It just depends on which side you're on. And I think there's probably some truth to that. But again, that's more of an observation than an answer. What is the difference between a reason and an excuse? The reason this is so important is because we're in this series called Failing Forward, and we're looking at we're looking at failure in your life, and we've observed in this series that you're going to fail in your life. You should not try to make it your goal to never fail again, because you're going to fail at that. So it'll just add another failure onto the failures that you're going to experience. You're going to fail, and since you're going to, you need to get good at it. We want to be good at failing, because I think you can be bad at failing. We want to be good at it because we're going to experience it. And I want to say the answer to this question, the difference between a reason and an excuse, is vital to failure in your life, vital to you having a good relationship with failure. The difference between a reason and an excuse is the difference between failing forward and failing backward. It's the difference between failure being a set up for you to move forward and a setback where you struggle. The difference between a reason and an excuse. So we're going to find this tension here in a story in the Bible, a story that is as old as time. We're going to begin at the beginning. It's about two people named Adam and Eve. In the beginning, God created everything, right? This is the very beginning. And in that, he created Adam and Eve. And he gives them this beautiful garden to live in, and it's bountiful. I mean, the trees are just heavy with fruit. They're provided for, perfect climate, so perfect they don't need to wear clothes, which is nice. And then also, evidently, they're blessed with a high metabolism, so they enjoy that for other reasons too. Like, it's a good situation, okay? That's what I'm trying to tell you. It's the definition of paradise. And God tells them some things right in the very beginning. You want to look at a couple of the things that God says. So Genesis 1, chapter 1, verse 28, God says this. Then God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground." Now that is a pretty sweet gig. I don't know if do you speak Old Testament God? Do you know what God just said there? Do you? No? He just said basically, have sex and rule the world. Nobody's excited about this. That's a pretty cool job, right? Can you imagine like meeting somebody? Do you ever met anybody who has like a vision board? And they're like, this is what I'm gonna do with my life, and they have all these plans. Can you imagine somebody like having the guts to write that down? Right? Like, I'm gonna have sex a lot and rule the world. Like, get them, man. I'm impressed with your ambition. That would be some lofty goals. So I guess what I want you to say, I want you to see they have a good thing going here. This is a good situation. Now, there is one rule. It's found in Genesis chapter 2, verses 16 and 17. But the Lord God warned them, you may freely eat the fruit of every tree in the garden, except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you eat its fruit, you are sure to die. So out of all the trees and out of all the fruit, you just can't eat from one of them. Just the one. That's all. It's the only thing, just that. Now, you know the story because you're living it. They fail. They royally fail at this. One rule and they fail. So the serpent comes out and the serpent tells Eve that she should totally eat the fruit. And his argument, by the way, is a very interesting argument. Satan's argument is that God is holding out on her, that her best life is outside of God's parameters that he's placed on her life. That's what he says, is, hey, you'd be better off if you did the thing that God says not to do. And by the way, that page 1 of Satan's playbook, he rarely has to turn to page 2. He's still using that today, that he tries to convince us constantly that your best life is outside of the parameters that God has placed on your life. So Eve fails. She eats the fruit. Adam also fails. Adam fails in multiple ways, right? He fails to step up, he fails to lead, he fails to step in, and he eats the fruit as well. So they do the thing that they were not supposed to do. And this failure, you could argue this is the greatest failure in human history. It reverberates out from them. It breaks something inside of them. It breaks their relationship with God. It breaks their relationship with creation and each other, and creation itself some way breaks as well. It cracks, and this is like a cosmic level failure. Everything goes sideways because of this. So it's a huge deal. Now, God would, back before this failure, one of the routines they had is God would walk with them at the end of the day. So at the end of this day, God shows up to have this walk with them, and he can't find them. So God says, hey, where are you? And what you need to know about questions in the Bible is that God, specifically when God asks a question, God never needs an answer. He knew where they were. But he always asks the question for the benefit of the person he's asking it to. So he says, hey, where are you? And Adam responds with, they're hiding because something like they're ashamed. They're ashamed, something they've never felt before. And then God asks another question. He says, did you eat from the tree that I told you not to eat? And again, God's not asking because God doesn't know. God already knows. He's asking because he wants Adam to respond to this question. His response to this is very important. So do you know how he responds? It was me, God, I did it. Don't let any consequences fall on Eve. It was all me, right? I wonder what history would look like if he had. No, his real response is Genesis chapter 3, verse 12. The man replied, it was the woman, them women, you gave me she gave me the fruit and I ate it. So he said it's the girl's fault, right? It's girls are evil. That's the problem. It's girls. Like, you guys nervous about that? I didn't say it. He did. I know we have the same name, but I didn't say it. Actually, he didn't blame the girl. Did you catch it? He said it was the woman you gave me who gave me the fruit. So Adam's like drawing this like, hey, yes, she gave me the fruit, but like you gave her to me and then she gave me the fruit. So really, God, it's kind of on you. Like that's a gutsy move, isn't it? Like he just broke pristine creation with this choice and he's like, God, I think this might be your fault. Like that's nuts. Like we were good, God, me, you, and the zebras. It was fine before she showed up. It was a little lonely, but we were good. And then when she showed up, fruit starts getting eaten. Like he was blaming God. Now, instinctively, I don't want you to answer this. I don't want you to think, I just want you to answer. Is what Adam just said a reason or an excuse? Which is it? Excuse, right? It just feels like one, right? That's an excuse. He's not giving a reason, he's giving an excuse. Okay, so God moves down the line to Eve, next verse. Then the Lord asked the woman, what have you done? The serpent deceived me, she replied. That's why I ate it. So the woman's answer is that the devil made her do it. Now, I don't know that too many people actually say that line anymore. I hope you don't. I hope you don't say that line because it's an absurd line. But you could also kind of say that what she says here is, man, I was like under spiritual attack and like there were these spiritual forces at work and like I just couldn't do anything about it. She's pushing things off onto this spiritual being. That's something I do hear these days. So let me ask you again, without thinking, just instinctively, is what Eve just did she just give a reason or an excuse? An excuse again, right? So both of them have given excuses. Now, God moves down the line to the serpent next, doesn't even ask the serpent a question. He just goes at him. The serpent, he's shrugging his snake shoulders. It was me. Yep, this was my plan all along. And immediately then there are consequences, right? To this decision, there are massive consequences. There are consequences that are immediate and long-term, right? So they have some things happen immediately in their life. Their relationship with God is broken. They're kicked out of paradise. Some stuff happens. And then there's some longer-term consequences as well. They die. We die. Death enters the picture. And then there's consequences for others as well. Doesn't just fall on them, it falls on us. Now all of us deal with this fallen, sinful, broken world. All of us deal with this fallen, sinful, broken self. So it's a huge, huge failure here. So back to the question, very important question. What is the difference between a reason and an excuse? Because this is the difference between failing forward and failing on your face. What is the difference? So I believe the difference between a reason and excuse can be summed up in one word. I know that's a lot of times an oversimplification when you try to boil it down to one thing, but I really think this accurately describes the difference. The difference between a reason and an excuse is responsibility. Responsibility. That's the difference. Responsibility is the gap between what could be a reason and what could be an excuse. Responsibility is built into a reason. Responsibility is pushed off and an excuse. So what I'm saying is, the difference between you failing forward in your life and you just failing or failing backward in your life is this one word, responsibility. So it's a really important thing. So what is it? What is responsibility? I looked it up on the best online dictionary that there is this week, the Urban Dictionary. Have you guys ever used it? It's really good. Careful. It can be a little inappropriate. It's crowdsourced, so there's no filters on there. It can be very inappropriate. Helps if you have kids, like teenagers, and you don't understand what they're saying. You can look on there and the weird words they use that don't make any sense. I still don't know what Riz means, but I'm figuring it out. I'm trying to. I don't know if they don't want me to know or if I'm just 40 now and it's like another language. So, worries me that you guys aren't laughing. Whatever, okay. So, I found some pretty good definitions on this. Some of them, so I looked up responsibility and responsible. So responsibility, something some people prefer to leave to other people. And I thought that was pretty good. Then responsible, this was definitely not you if you're reading this, go do the dishes. I was like, fair enough. The reason I don't have a car, thought that was pretty good. And then my favorite one, it said responsible, and I think this is really kind of hard to argue with. I think this is the perfect definition. The opposite of a teenager. Anybody who has teenagers would agree with that. I'm sorry if you're a teenager listening, but you know it's true. Okay, so real definition. Responsibility is kind of a difficult thing to get our hands around. I think it has an element of you own it. It has an element of you carry it. It has an element of you take accountability for it. And there's an element of you take action in it. So let me break those down. When it comes to failure, taking responsibility means you own it. You own it. I did it. It's not about talking. You don't talk about everybody else's role in the failure or the circumstances in the failure. You keep the focus on you. And the reason this one is so important, is because some people, in order to own something, have this mentality that the whole thing has to 100% be on them. And they're waiting to take any kind of responsibility for a situation where they are 100% at fault to blame in the situation. And I just want to say, if you wait until you are 100% the only reason something happened to take responsibility, you're never going to take it. Because almost every situation, you could argue that somebody has played some role, some circumstances played some role. So what you're always doing is trying to find the piece of the thing that happened that you need to own. There's a percentage of whatever the failure was that you need to own, right? And what that means is, if you really want to be a person who takes responsibility, that no matter what the percentage is, you're going to own some piece of it. So it's easy when you're 75% to blame and someone else is 25% to blame, right? That's easy for you to say, okay, this is mostly my fault. Maybe it's not easy. Maybe I shouldn't say easy, because some people struggle no matter what. But what about when it's just 25% your fault or 5% on you? I think those are the times where it's very tempting to kind of push off. But what I want to say is that I guess you have to decide what kind of person you want to be. Do you want to be somebody who fiercely takes responsibility for the things that you should own in your life? That means you're going to look for the percentage. You're going to look for that piece that you need to own. So for example, say you're late to work. Happens, right? And say it's snowed. One of the first snows of the year. You know how everybody just forgets to drive. It's only been 8 months, but we all have no idea how to do this. And everybody drives like idiots. So you could get to work and be like, sorry, boss, it snowed. And you could completely put it on the snow, right? And the idiots that are driving, right? Wherever you are. It's their fault that I'm late. And there's a piece of that could be valid. But here's what I want to say. You do have this magical rectangle that lives in your pocket that predicts the next day's weather. Legit. We take this for granted. If you showed somebody from 200 years ago, hey, I have a rectangle in my pocket that can tell us what the weather's going to be like tomorrow, they would think you were like a wizard. That's crazy that we have this. You got to admit that. That's nuts. And I know, like, weathermen aren't always right, but come on, the closer they get, the closer they are to being accurate. So you could probably, with pretty good accuracy, say whether it was going to be snowy the next day. And same rectangle, you could program to wake you up a little bit earlier. It's crazy that you could do that, all with just one little rectangle. So you could say, this is 100% on the snow, or you could say, hey, boss, my bad, man. I should have checked the weather. I should have set my alarm earlier, and you could own a piece of it. You can't control the weather. You can't. But you can control some other things. So again, what you're looking for here is whatever you can own, you want to own if you want to be a person who takes responsibility. Now, another aspect of it is that you carry it. You don't push the weight of the thing off onto someone else. You don't try to push the how do we fix this off onto other people. You want to carry what you need to carry. That's not usually like a in the moment thing. That's a, hey, I failed. Now here are the consequences. Give them to me. I need to carry that. I need to do whatever I need to do to make this right. And you're going to carry that. You're not going to push it off onto other people. And then you accept accountability for it. And I got to tell you, I feel like that's not like let's just be honest, it's not a fun thing. I'm not like, hey, I look forward to being held accountable for stuff. Like, that's not a super enjoyable part of life. But if you want to be a person who takes responsibility, you want to accept accountability for your actions. And there's two groups of people, typically, that don't do this very well. It's politicians and children, right? It's like the same. It's weird. Like, you ever heard a politician, they say that line like, mistakes were made? Like, that's the lamest line you could ever say, right? Can you imagine saying that to your spouse? Mistakes were made. Like, oh yeah, you're gonna get knocked out by your wife for saying that. You can't do that. But that's how they do it, right? They have this ability to just, they can dodge all the accountability. My kids are masterful at this. I'm proud of them for how good they are at this. It's impressive. So we have 4 kids, me and my wife. Every once in a while, something will happen in the house that's like, hey, there's this mess or there's this thing that has happened. And I'm convinced that there's actually secretly a 7th person living in our house. Lives in the shadows in the basement somewhere. Because the reason is it's so consistent. So if we ask our kids, hey, who did this? They all give the same answer. So it has to be a name of a person. And the name of this person wasn't me. I don't know where but this person is a slob. You need to know. I don't know where they don't turn off lights. They don't close doors. They have terrible aim in the bathroom. So they need to work on their life. But if you want to take responsibility, you can't do the thing where you're not accepting accountability for your actions. And then this last piece is, I think there's an action part of taking responsibility. And what I mean is, when you say you're going to take responsibility, it's active, not passive. Because I think a lot of times there's almost a passive way you can just not take responsibility for something or not decide to pick it up whenever you need to pick it up. You're just like, this is not on me. You need to actively pursue making it right. Not waiting for the person to come to you, not waiting for your boss to come to you, not waiting for the consequences to hit, but you actively go and try to make your failure right. So that's my very long and drawn out definition of responsibility. Now, here's the biggest reason I think taking responsibility, before I get into that, let me just say, I do think all of us have a temptation not to take responsibility. Can we all sit in the same boat here and say, hey, you know what? It's always a temptation to not accept responsibility for stuff. It just is, right? We know we had it when we were kids and teenagers. Let's be honest, we never really grew out of the temptation. Maybe we get better at fighting the temptation, but I think we all have a temptation to do this. So I don't want to say like, oh, you're such a terrible person if you're tempted to not take responsibility. We all have it. And I think it comes from the story we just looked at. Adam and Eve, right out the gate, didn't take responsibility. And I think it's kind of their brokenness. Now we've inherited this, that we also kind of want to always answer with, it was her, it was him, it was this, it was that it's always a temptation. It's always a temptation. But there is a really big reason why you shouldn't do that. There's a really big reason why you need to be a responsibility taker in your life, where you need to fiercely try to take responsibility for things in your life, especially when it comes to failure. So listen to this. This is a really important sentence here. When you give up responsibility, when you push it off onto someone else, you push it off onto something else. When you give up responsibility, you also give up the power to grow and change. Both. Your taking of responsibility is intrinsically linked to your growth and your change in your life. That is so important. It's almost like the two are bound together by an unbreakable chain. If you throw responsibility out, automatically your growth and change go out the window with it. Do you know that? That's why this is vital. If you decide to be a person who's always throwing responsibility, what I want you to imagine is your growth and change is going out the window with it. If you're always pushing it off away from you, you're pushing growth and change off as well. This is the difference between failure being devastating in your life and failure being the fertile ground in which God can move in your life. You're gonna fail. If you refuse to take responsibility, you get nothing for it. But if you do take responsibility and you fail, then you can get something from it. You can learn from it. You can grow in it. God can move in it if you take responsibility. Now, there's some other consequences, and I'm going to go through those quickly. I think when you fail to take responsibility, it actually enables more failure. You think about that. If you keep pushing responsibility for your failure off onto others, onto circumstances, when you blame, when you minimize, when you cover up, it's inevitably going to lead to more failure. It's going to become a string of failures. A loss is going to become a losing streak. A strikeout's going to become a slump. You're going to be in a string of failures because by not taking responsibility, you're not learning, you're not growing, you are dooming yourself to do it again and again and again and again and again. So failing to take responsibility for a failure creates more failure. Secondly, when you fail and don't take responsibility, I think it enhances the consequences. It enhances the consequences. The consequences for a person who fails and takes responsibility are better, are less painful than the person who fails and blames and hides and waits until they're cornered. The pain of the situation is increased when you fail to take responsibility. For everyone, by the way, not just for you, but for the people who also experience your failure. And then thirdly, and I think this one's really important, when you fail and don't take responsibility, you erode trust with the people around you. And this one, man, if you just needed one piece of motivation, I think this one is it. Because back to how we started, think about it. If someone hurts you and you have a conversation with them, so you're already hurt, right? You already got a knife sticking out of you somewhere. And then when you have the conversation with them, you ask that bold, brave question, hey, why did you do that? And they start making excuses and pushing responsibility off onto others, off onto situation. Maybe even they're pushing some of the responsibility for that knife sticking out of you onto you. Doesn't it almost feel like they're sticking another knife in they're getting another knife into that same wound? Sometimes, let's be honest, sometimes the excuses hurt more than the actual thing that happened. Because now you're even you just want to push away. And it's terrifying now to be around them because anytime they fail, you're worried you're going to get a double knife to the chest. So it erodes trust. Now, I think it works in reverse as well, though. This is the part that's so intriguing to me. So do some math with me. Nobody in your life is going to not fail you. I know this is double negative, but you're with me, right? Nobody's going to not fail you. Nobody. Every single person who you have in your life is going to fail you. So if you're like, the only kind of people I want around me are the people who are never going to fail me, you should push away from everyone and live up on a mountain somewhere because that's the only kind of scenario you've got. Otherwise, you have to decide, okay, when people fail me, how do I want that to look? So the kind of person you're looking for is the person who, when they fail you, they accept responsibility for it. They say, hey, that was me. I'm sorry. Here's the reasons. I'm not pushing responsibility off. Here's the reasons I did it. It's no excuse. I accept it. I'm sorry. How can I make it right? That's the kind of person you want, right? You want somebody like that. And that but in my opinion, that increases trust. When you do something, you accept responsibility, you apologize, you try to make it right. That increases trust quickly. So we have somebody who works here. I don't know if you've met Pastor Chris yet. He's our executive pastor. We kind of recruited him a couple of years ago. And when he came in, one of the things that struck me about him was he would make a mistake. And sometimes, it'd be the littlest thing. I wouldn't even notice sometimes something that went sideways. He would come to me and he would apologize so quickly and try to make it right. And for me, he did it a couple of times in a row. What that did for me is that made my trust with him go real high, because I didn't think he was gonna bat 1,000, right? Everybody makes mistakes. But to have a guy who's like, hey, that was me, my bad, I'm sorry, here's what I'm gonna do to make it right. I'm like, I can go a long way with somebody like that. Somebody who accepts responsibility, apologizes, and wants to make it right. Like, he does it so good that like, he's so quick at it. He'll screw up and then he's right here. Me, if I hurt you, you're gonna have to wait a minute. Just so you know, you know what's in here? That's my pride right here. So you're gonna have to wait until I can squish that down, and then I'll get to the part where I'm saying, hey, my bad. It just takes me a minute, but not Chris, man. He's inspired me that I wanna be better at this. And it increased trust. So here's what I would say to you. If you want people to trust you, get really good at taking responsibility. Like that's a huge thing. If you think, man, I just want people to trust me more in my life, we'll take responsibility more. That's the thing that will increase trust in your relationships. I have one more observation about responsibility. I want you to imagine the person in your life. I'm going to ask you, this is all in your head. Don't talk about it because otherwise it would be super gossipy. This is just you and you, so you're allowed to think it. Think of the person in your life who just never takes responsibility for anything. Do you got anybody like that in your life? Maybe somebody you work with, maybe a distant, hopefully distant relative who they just never take responsibility for stuff. Do you have anybody like that who man, it's always their ex's fault, or the economy, or the Democrats, or the Republicans, or their boss, or this person? They never take responsibility. Every time something goes wrong in their life, they're giving you this reason and this excuse and this excuse. They're always pushing it away. Do you have somebody like that in your life? Stop laughing. You do, okay. Now picture them. Ask you a question about them. Are they happy? They aren't, are they? Can you think of anybody who's bad at taking responsibility who's actually happy? I can't. And it's weird because I actually think what this means is that in some way, not taking responsibility, when it bottoms out to zero, somebody taking zero responsibility in their life, it's almost like their happiness hits zero at the same time. Because responsibility, not taking responsibility, from what I've seen, is miserable life. It's a miserable life. And I think the reason is, as much as we're tempted to not take responsibility because of this brokenness inside of us, if you'd go back one step before the failure, I actually think we were created to be responsibility takers. That's actually a part of God's original design for us, that's supposed to be who we are. We're supposed to fiercely take responsibility. That's a part of it. Now I can prove it to you even more. Does anybody work in a place where nobody wants to take responsibility? You work in a place like that where everybody's got it's the line not my job. They got it tattooed on their forehead. I'm not doing that. That's outside of my purview. I'm sending the email to somebody else to deal with this problem because I'm not doing it. Have you ever worked in an environment like that? Let me ask you, did you enjoy working there? No, you hated it, right? It was awful. And what happens in those environments? If you work at a place where everybody has the not my job, everybody has the very low responsibility taking, what has to happen then is that same workplace has to increase the rules that they have, right? All of a sudden, HR department is really big, right? And the employee handbook is this thick, and it deals with every single little thing that could possibly ever go wrong because nobody takes responsibility. So that every time somebody doesn't take responsibility, they have to write it down. So when responsibility goes down, rules go up. Right? And you know this if you're blessed with a good teenager, right? A good teenager who takes responsibility. By the way, I'd love to talk to you after if you have one of those because I want to know how you did it. If you have a teenager who takes responsibility, you have less rules. If you have a teenager who doesn't take responsibility, you have more rules. Isn't that interesting that seems connected too? Well, think back to what God originally created, what he told them, what he told Adam and Eve before they failed. He said, hey, be fruitful and multiply, have dominion, rule the world. We didn't read it, but he also told them to tend the garden and take care of it. And then he also said, don't eat from the one tree. So what that is a whole lot of responsibility and one rule. So in our original, when God first created us, it was a high responsibility environment and a low rule environment. And to me, I think that's what we were created to live in. That's the environments that we thrive in. Those are the environments that we want to be in, is a community of people who are responsibility takers, that where we pick things up that maybe aren't even ours, but we're going to do it together. I read this, there was this church website. It was a kind of a startup church. It wasn't quite a church plant, but they had this website. And you know how all the churches have like our leaders page or our staff? I don't think they had staff, but it was like a leaders page, key volunteers or something like that. It had the person's picture and their name and their title. You know, a lot of churches have that. I know you guys don't stalk church websites like I do, but that's normal. We have one. But this one was unique because it had their pictures and then it had all their names. And then underneath their names for their title, it said, whatever it takes. Whatever it takes, whatever it takes, whatever it takes, whatever it takes. And I thought, man, that's cool. Like, I want to work there. That's the kind of environment I want to be in, where people are like, hey, whatever it takes. And by the way, I don't know if you know this, we're kind of blessed with that here. We have a staff here who, that's what they're about, man. Like, we don't have to ask for stuff. I don't got to worry about people slacking off. We are fired up to do whatever God's called us to do. And it is a sweet environment to be in. It's a sweet environment to be in. Now, last observation about the story. I think how we handle responsibility, whether we take it or we push it off, however we handle it, I think it's contagious. I think it's contagious. So look at it. Adam was asked, hey, did you eat the fruit? And he didn't, he pushed it, right? He's like, I don't want that. That was Eve. And then immediately, it's like Eve caught that, it was contagious, and she pushed it off onto the serpent. Like she just followed the thing that he did. So I really do genuinely wonder if Adam had said, God, it was me, I did it. You told me this was important. I screwed it up. I didn't lead like I was supposed to, and I ate the fruit. It's on me. I'm sorry, help me. I wonder if he had done that, if Eve wouldn't have jumped in and been like, whoa, hold up. I handed it to him. I listened to that idiot. I shouldn't have. God, I'm sorry. It's on me. I wonder if the taking of responsibility would have been just as contagious as the shirking of responsibility, because I do think it's contagious. So I wonder if in your life you could see yourself as someone who could be a leader when it comes to taking responsibility. If you could, by taking it, by being a person who goes out there and says, man, I'm at whatever piece of this I need to own, I'm going to be active in that. And whenever we have conversations about it, I'm going to shine the spotlight on my part. I'm going to do what I can do. I'm going to change. I'm going to apologize. I'll do whatever I can to make up for it. I'm going to do that. I'm going to be fierce in that. Any environment, any percentage of the failure that you need to own, you'd go after it and try to own it. I wonder if that wouldn't start to change the people around you. If you were fierce at taking responsibility. Now, I know some of you are saying, that is terrifying. If I do that where I work, if I take responsibility, everybody else shirks responsibility, it's all gonna roll to me. Find a new job. That's my solution to that scenario. You really might just be in a toxic work environment. But in a normal situation, I wonder if you starting to say, hey, I'm gonna take responsibility. I wonder if it wouldn't catch. I wonder if it wouldn't free people up around you to say, hey, they took it, I'm gonna take it now too. And here's the thing, here's why I think we should be that. If you are a Christian, if you trust in Jesus, if you're a Jesus follower, you believe that he died on the cross in your place for your sins, if you're that, man, you should be a responsibility taker. You should be. We should be the best at this. Because think about this story. Adam and Eve failed in the garden. And let's be fair to them. This was the first failure in human history. They didn't have any evidence of how an almighty, powerful God was going to respond to their failure. They didn't know, right? They didn't know how God was going to respond. So when they pushed responsibility off, it was kind of out of fear, right? They didn't know what he was going to do. But listen to me, Christian. You do. You know how our God responds to failure, right? You know what he does, right? You know he is fierce in his love and his forgiveness for you. You know actually what he did on the cross was he took responsibility for your sin on himself. He took all the responsibility for all the sin onto himself. That was his response, was love and mercy and grace and forgiveness for failure. That's what he does. So you don't have a God who you're like, I don't know what's going to happen if I admit I failed. No, you do. He's going to love you. He's going to give you grace and mercy, and he's going to want to help you grow from that. You have that God. Like I said last week, I believe the presence of God is the safest place to fail. The safest place to fail because he is a gracious and loving God. So you should be able to lead the way and saying, hey, I'll own this, because you know that you've got a God who's there for you, who's there with you, who paid for your sin already. So you should be able to be a light in all these places to show people what this is like. You cannot blame your way to a better life. You can't do it. You can't blame your way to a better marriage. You can't blame your way to a better career. You can't. Do you know that? I mean, it's so tempting to blame all the time, but let's just be real. You can't. You cannot improve your life through blaming others or blaming circumstances. The only way to fail forward, the only way to grow and change is to take responsibility and move from that and grow from that. Pray with me. God, I pray for the person right now who struggles to take responsibility. Maybe they grew up in a household where nobody ever did that. It's never been modeled for them, and it is terrifying. And their instinct is the opposite. Lord, I pray that you would meet them right here, right now. Help them to feel your love and your grace and your mercy in their failures. Begin right now, Lord, the process of transforming their mind. Lord, I pray for the person who maybe doesn't struggle with it, but it's always a temptation. And maybe there are certain circumstances where it's more tempting than others. Lord, I pray that you would impress upon us this idea that if we push off responsibility, we're pushing off our ability to grow and change as well. I pray that would be seared in our mind, that we can't improve our life through blame. We can't improve our relationships through blame. Lord, I pray that we would see that clearly. Lord, and I pray that this church would be a responsibility-taking church, Lord, that we would fiercely take responsibility, and that this place would be a safe place to fail. That we would, like you, be loving and gracious and forgiving, and that this environment would be one where somebody could fail and be better for it. In Jesus' name I pray.